Hi, good evening. It's Mayor Weinstein. Good to be with you again tonight. Every week we do the show, Never Again Live show, and we discuss issues, we delve into issues. We bring on experts to join us as well. Tonight we have Robert Spencer, who's going to be with us. We're going to be discussing hate, anti Semitism, BDS, what the agenda is from these organizations, from their sponsors as well. There's a lot to talk about. And I'm going to ask everyone who's joining us if you could please share this with the various groups and pages that you're part of on various social media platforms. We'll reach a lot more people, have a stronger impact. And it's very important. Earlier this evening, I had a meeting with a number of students who are very concerned in Toronto about the rise of anti-Semitism, what the BDS is doing here, their anti-Semitism, their blatant hate. And we're coming up with strategies. I encourage everyone, join us. We're going to be going under the banner, a few different banners, Jews Lives Matter, Israel Now, be part of the IN group, IN, Israel Now, and Never Again movement. So you'll be hearing a lot. We're working on our new website. It's going to be up and running very soon, but we want to perfect it. As we do every show, I discuss the Parsha a little bit, and then we delve right into what the issues are. So again, please, whoever's joining us, please share this with the various groups and pages that you're part of. We'll reach a lot more people. We'll have a stronger impact. The Parsha that's going to be read in every synagogue this Shabbat is Parsha's Balak. Balak was a king. He had hate for the Jewish people. He heard of them leaving Egypt, all the miracles that happened, but he despised the Jewish people. He wanted them wiped out. He did not want them to enter into Israel. And he hired a prophet, non-Jewish prophet, who was known. This prophet was actually an advisor to Pharaoh, who was coming up with a scheme before the Jews left to murder all the Jews. His name was Bilam. And he hired Bilam to go and curse the Jewish people because he heard of all the military victories that the Jewish people had already as they're traveling through the desert. He wanted to find another way to impede the Jewish people, weaken the Jewish people, and ultimately destroy the Jewish people. So he hired this prophet Bilam. And it says in the Parsha, Bilam arose in the morning and saddled his she-donkey and went with the officers of Moab. God's wrath was flared because he was going, and an angel of God stood on the road to impede him. He was riding on his she-donkey, and his two young men were with him. The she-donkey saw the angel of God standing on the road with a sword drawn in his hand. So the she-donkey turned away from the road and went into the field. Then Bilam struck the she-donkey to turn it back onto the road. The angel of God stood in the path of the vineyards, a fence on this side and a fence on that side. The she-donkey saw the angel of God and pressed against the wall, and it pressed Bilam's leg against the wall, and he continued to strike the donkey. The angel of God went further and stood in the narrow place where there was no room to turn right or left. The she-donkey saw the angel of God and crouched beneath Bilam. Bilam's anger flared, and he struck the she-donkey with the staff. Listen to this. God opened the mouth of the she-donkey, and it said to Bilam, "What have I done to you that you struck me these 3 times?" That's the donkey talking. Bilam said to the she-donkey, "Because you mocked me." He's having a conversation. It's like his buddy. "If only there were a sword in my hand, I would now have killed you." The she-donkey said to Bilam, "Am I not your she-donkey that you have ridden all your life until this day? Have I been accustomed to do such a thing to you? Bilam says no. Then God uncovered Bilam's eyes, and he saw the angel of God standing on the road with his sword drawn in his hand. He bowed his head and prostrated himself on his face. It's a complicated parsha, but there's a lesson here. The donkey saw what was going on. The donkey understood the truth. We're living at a time where we unfortunately have Jewish leaders, organizations such as J Street that actually embolden the BDS. They think the BDS could be convinced to have peace with the Jewish people. They think that radical Islamic imams who preach genocide of the Jewish people in Israel and the West, that you could strike a deal with them and they're going to really respect you. Last week on the show, we mentioned a so-called rabbi who heard of a training camp in Gaza run by Hamas for kids. And she said on Twitter, this rabbi, that she'd love to go there and be a counselor. We have in Canada, there's this, let me just read this, so-called Rabbi David Mevasser, a senior member of Independent Jewish Voices, and a longtime active member of the New Democratic Party, recited once again the Holy Kaddish, prayer for the dead, for dead Palestinians, including military operatives of the leading Palestinian Islamic organizations, Hamas and the Islamic Jihad. Quote, I'm saying this, meaning Kaddish, really for the hundreds of people who were killed in Gaza 2 and 3 weeks ago. David Mevasser said in the speech at the vigil for Palestine that was held in Mississauga, June 5th. The IDF reported that more than 200 terrorists were neutralized during the recent armed conflict. Hamas leader in Gaza Strip on Wednesday said 80 militants were killed during the latest war with Israel, of whom 57 were military operatives of Hamas, 22 operatives of the Islamic Jihad, and 1 member of another Islamic terrorist group called the Popular Resistance Committees. David Mevasser also read Kaddish for dead Palestinians, including terrorists of Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, on May 21st, 2018, in an event called Yiskar for Gaza in front of the Jewish Community Center of Greater Vancouver that was organized by Independent Jewish Voices, Vancouver. By reciting Kaddish for terrorists of anti-Semitic organizations that publicly and systemically advocate for the mass killing of Jews, David Mevasser teaches us about his worldview regarding the Jewish people in the land of Israel and the positions of the organizations he represents, Independent Jewish Voices. Also bear in mind, just a few days ago, Sarah Silverman, comedian, Jewish comedian, made it public that she would like to join the squad, Yohan Omar, Rashida Tlaib. She thinks it's neat. She thinks it's the Jewish thing to do, to join these people who advocate for the annihilation of the Jewish state. And in this parsha, the donkey sees the truth. And Jews go in the way of Bilam, thinking it's not so bad. It is bad. It's that bad. It's horrible. Here's the bottom line. In 1948, the Jewish people proclaimed the state of Israel. Immediately following that, Arab armies and Arabs within Israel attempted to destroy that new Jewish state. The war ends. Israel wins. The Jewish people win. There are ceasefire lines drawn up. Jordan was able to seize East Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria, which they call the West Bank. The reality would have been a lot different today if from that moment on, the Jordanians and the Arabs would have said to Israel, here's the boundary. You people, you Jews, consider this wall to be of importance to you. You're going to have to come over and show your passport. These are the hours of operation and maybe a little fee. And you'll be protected. You can come in and out as much as you want. And you could have access to Jewish holy sites, what you consider to be holy sites throughout Judea and Samaria, what they call the West Bank. That's not what happened. What happened was that the Jordanians and the Arabs there destroyed Jewish holy sites. They made the wall, the Kotel, into a garbage dump. In 1967, when Jordan joined the war, the Arab war against the existence of Israel, and went to war against Israel, and bear in mind, remember, like I said, they had East Jerusalem, they had the West Bank. What did they want by joining this war? They wanted Tel Aviv. They wanted the Jews into the sea. Jordan lost. Israel won. And Israel reached out to Jordan and said, let's make peace. Reached out to the Arab world, let's make peace. And they said no. The Arab world has never apologized to this day for what they have done, for the desecration of Jewish holy sites and Jewish properties. What's going on today in what they call the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, or the Shimon Hasidic neighborhood, what we call it, in Jerusalem, the eastern part of Jerusalem, it was Jewish ownership of property that Jordan seized in the 48 war. And when Jordan lost East Jerusalem in the 67 war, Israel reached out to Jordan and said, these properties are, we have the owners are still alive. We have the deeds. So they worked out some kind of a deal that the Arabs living there in the properties have to pay rent. They have not paid rent. The Supreme Court of Israel has finally ruled that failure to pay rent, they're going to have to be expelled from the properties, and the legal owners of the properties, which are Jews, are allowed to put in whoever they want to rent the property to or sell the property to. That's how it works in any country. And this is the double standard going on today, that these BDS organizations and radical Islamic leaders and organizations spread false news, and they have more numbers than we have, and they come out louder than us, but it's completely false, and it's based on hate, and it's anti-Semitic. We're going to be talking about a lot of issues tonight. I'm pleased to have with us Robert Spencer, who's an expert on radical Islam. He's here to join us. So let's bring on Robert Spencer. Robert, how are you?
Just great, Meir. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Always good.
Likewise.
You know, I want to bring something to your attention before we get into this. You know, there's an organization, there's a lot of different Jewish organizations, and there's one organization, just found out that they're having a program, bringing 3 speakers, virtual program on anti-Semitism, the rise of anti-Semitism. And what we could do about it. So one is somebody from the UJA, okay, establishment. Another is someone who has some knowledge of cyber security, okay. And another is a police officer, superintendent in York Region, who's supposed to be an expert on hate. His name is Ricky Verapan. Now, so I saw the advertising for it, and I contacted the organization. And I said, "What are you doing?" I know this police officer, Ricky Verapan. Ricky Verapan went after Rabbi Kaplan a number of years ago when the JDL was bringing in Pamela Geller, and we were going to have the event at his synagogue. And Superintendent Verapan said to Rabbi Kaplan, "Since you're a chaplain in York Region, we will remove the chaplain status from you if you allow Pamela Geller to speak in your synagogue." So he got very nervous about it, the rabbi, because he, when you're a chaplain, you could do things. And we had a meeting, and we had to have another location for the event. She did come in, and it was packed, and there was a lot of press coverage as well. But, I just looked at that and I was going, we have identified radical Islamic leaders that are police chaplains in other jurisdictions, and they have made outrageous comments. In fact, when we heard about in London, Ontario, that there was a family that was killed by some crazy person, we don't know much about the person who did it, whether it was on drugs or anything, or if he was with a hate group, or we don't know. We don't have that information. Nobody does yet. But at a memorial event for the family that was killed, an Islamic family, an Islamic leader got up to give a speech, a short speech, to conclude the event, the memorial. And he's a police chaplain as well. And he blamed Israel for it. And it was outrageous. So, and no one, to my knowledge, has approached him from the police services to say, his position might be in jeopardy as a chaplain. Or
in these demonstrations. And we've seen the outrageous increase in anti-Semitism, in open anti-Semitism, in violence against innocent people, violence against Jews in particular, and calls for the total destruction of Israel, the Khaybar chant, which is a reminder of a massacre that Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, carried out according to Islamic tradition of Jews, saying it's going to happen again, there's going to be another massacre. Imagine if you had a rally of Zionists and supporters of Israel saying there's going to be a massacre of Muslims. You'd never hear the end of it. And this double standard seems to persist and just get worse as the years go by. You take, for example, even this recent incident that you mentioned of the murder of this Muslim family in London, Ontario. I have actually an article up by a Canadian herself, Christine Douglas Williams, who you may know, at Jihad Watch today, talking about how this is being used, this is being instrumentalized by the Trudeau government to stigmatize any kind of criticism of Islam, any kind of opposition to jihad violence, opposition to Sharia oppression of women, Sharia oppression of gays, and even support for Israel. That it's all Islamophobia, and all of it supposedly gave rise to this incident. Although, as you very rightly and importantly pointed out, we don't really know anything about this young man who did this. We hear from the police that he did it for Islamophobic reasons, but no statements from him have been released. He doesn't have any kind of associations with violent groups, with Nazi groups, with anybody who might have done something like this. And so it's hard to escape the impression that this whole thing is being used in an opportunistic fashion. Now you contrast that to the numerous incidents of jihad violence that we've seen in Toronto and elsewhere. And how immediately after that, we heard about how it was very important not to stigmatize the Islamic community and how we had to watch out for Islamophobic backlash and so on. Nobody ever said, oh, we have to crack down on jihad preaching. We have to crack down on the idea that violence against non-believers can be justified. If they had been consistent, that's what would have been said at those times. But instead, it was all about how the perpetrators were, or the group from which the perpetrators sprang was actually the real victim. And we see it again and again. When Muslims attack non-Muslims, Muslims are the victims. When non-Muslims attack Muslims, Muslims are the victims. In every case, Muslims are the victims, no matter what the actual facts are.
It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
You know, there's, I mean, there are so many organizations that we're looking into, monitoring. There's one organization, Samidoun. They're one of the primary organizations behind these BDS protests happening in the United States, in Canada, and other countries as well. The government of Israel has declared Samidoun to be a terrorist organization, a front for the PFLP. But there's a song that they just produced and they're promoting on their social media platforms. You should take a look at this, and I'd like to hear what you have to say about it. It's very graphic and it just came out. So if our doctor in the studio could, I think the song is called Suli.
قولي يا سمرة وجولي وشدي حيلي، راجع أنا وياكي بكرة عالدار. ما يحلالي غير صوتك يا أصيلي، هاجم عالعدا وناوي أكويهم نار. قولي يا سمرة وجولي وشدي حيلي، راجع أنا وياكي بكرة عالدار. ما يحلالي غير صوتك يا أصيلي، هاجم عالعدا وناوي أكويهم نار. يا حلالي ويا مالي يلا يلا، نزلوا فدائية عالأرض المحتلة. قلنا يا عالم والله الله الله، قالوا فارس مع سمرة أخذوا القرار. قولي يا سمرة وجولي وشدي حيلي، راجع أنا وياكي بكرة عالدار. ما يحلالي غير صوتك يا أصيلي، هاجم عالعدا وناوي أكويهم نار. ميلي عاقد في ميلي وامحي ليلي، وضوي على الخليل وعجبال النار. حيلي راجع انا وياكي بكره عالدار ما يحلالي غير صوتك يا اصيلي هاجم عالعدا وناوي اكويهم نار ليلي ليلي يا ويلي طول ليلي انتي وحدك دليلي عخط النار.
Well, you see on that video clearly the promotion of violence and the support for, well, here's a tweet that they put out today, this organization, Samidoun. More than 85% of Palestinians surveyed prefer armed resistance. Now, many of these BDS organizations, they call for not only an intifada there, but they call for a global intifada. That's the words they use. The intifada must be globalized. And we see a lot of these BDS groups and radical Islamic groups, they consider Canada and the United States to be occupied lands that really has no right to exist. Some of them go so far, American flags and Canadian flags, of course, Israeli flags should be burnt, destroyed. But it seems like more and more there's this, not just the focus on Israel, but they're also obsessed about the West, that it has to be defeated. So we have, well, in the Jewish community, we have organizations that are supposed to be responsible for Jewish immigrants, like when there was the issue of Soviet Jews that were being treated horribly in the Soviet Union, Russia. These organizations like Jewish Immigrant Aid Society, and in the United States, their organization there, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, they would help raise money to help facilitate Jews from the Soviet Union to come to Western countries and have an easier time getting used to life here. Now these organizations have focused on assisting immigration from Islamic countries when there are surveys out there, even from the Anti-Defamation League, that says in these countries, the population, 90%, 95% are highly anti-Semitic. And yet these organizations, Jayas and Hayas, they're using their funds from the community to help bring these people in. Do they not see that there's going to be a correlation, a spike in anti-Semitism, number one, when we see these violent protests, you bring more over that have these views from those countries? But are we also setting up almost like a Trojan horse in the West, that when they hold these views that, I'll just put this person on hold that's calling, 1 second. Hello, you're on, but one moment, sir. But is that encouraging the problem even more? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, Robert.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. Of course it is. What we are doing is sowing the seeds for future conflict, because the people who are coming over from Islamic countries are coming over with the attitudes and assumptions and beliefs that they were raised in those countries. And so a lot of that, for a great majority of them, involves a deeply rooted anti-Semitism. This is not because of Israel or because of factors in their own countries. This is because of the religion of Islam, which teaches deeply anti-Semitic things, and most people have no idea of it in the West, or no idea of its implications. So, for example, the Quran in chapter 5, verse 82, the holy book of Islam, says that the Jews are the worst enemies of the Muslims. Now, if you think that the supreme being, that the creator of the universe, is telling you that your worst enemies are the Jews, are you going to want to come to a peace accord with them or live in peace with them in the West when you come to Canada or the United States or to Europe? These are theological principles. See, you know, a Jew or a Christian is not going to think that the 10 Commandments are negotiable or subject to vote or consensus. The 10 Commandments come from God, and that's the way it is. You like them, you don't like them, they are what they are. And the Quran is the same thing for Muslims, the perfect, immutable, unchangeable, eternal word of Allah. And it says that the Jews are enemies of Allah, are under the curse of Allah, as I said, are the worst enemies of the Muslims. They are always scheming to cause trouble for the Muslims. And this is not just somebody's opinion. This is supposed to be the eternal word of God. And so when they come to the West, those who are devout, even a lot of them who aren't, because these become cultural attitudes in Islamic countries, they bring their anti-Semitism with them. And this is going to have effects that reverberate down for the next few generations at very least, and probably longer.
Right. We have a caller. Yes, sir. Go ahead. You have a question?
Good evening.
Evening.
Yes. First of all, Mayor, the next time you have Dr. Spencer and he's wearing a tie, I expect you to wear one too.
Well,
Now,
it's summertime sometimes.
but I just want to bring up just a few more incidents because you were talking about what's happening here in America.
Right.
In the last week alone, we had a professor from Kingsborough Community College, an Orthodox Jew,
Right.
who was basically forced to resign his union membership because of an overwhelming anti-Israel resolution that was passed covertly. And he went on record saying that the unions for all these schools, especially at CUNY schools, were financing a lot of the anti-Israel activism on campus. You well know that this past weekend, there was supposed to be an event in Philadelphia with all these different ethnic groups having caterers coming on their own trucks, and they had to cancel because there was an Israeli caterer that was going to be there, and there were all kinds of threats made against the organizers.
Right.
You also know that over the last few weeks that Zim, the Israeli cargo company, was blocked from unloading in a few docks, one of them being in California, and the union dock workers there refused to cross the picket line. And then lastly, it was just also reported that a doctor in Phoenix, and this is not the first time, I don't know if she's a Palestinian, but basically in a tweet, she also talked about killing Jewish patients. And this is on the heels of a similar incident a few years ago in Cleveland,
Right.
when a medical student was saying that if she, when she graduates, she's going to kill Jewish patients. And this is very much on the rise in America. And if you notice, the same people calling for defunding the police are the same ones calling for defunding Israel.
Right.
And then when you call them out, and I'm speaking about the squad right now, they say, you can't criticize us. You're endangering us.
Right. And Sarah Silverman wants to join the squad.
Yeah. Now, listen, she belongs with them.
Right. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
You know, we have Alan. So, you know, we have a video clip just to show. Alan's off. Okay. Well, maybe he'll come back on. But we have a video clip. I'll show you, Robert. If our doctor in the studio could show it, from a protest, I think it was last week, Friday, in New York City. And Samidoun was one of the sponsoring organizations of it. Just what they say, you know, they're very clear in their message. Extremely clear.
We want all of it. We want all of it. We don't want to say. We don't want to say. We want all of it. We want all of it. New York City, you.
Yeah, there you go. So
There's
they
a couple
want.
more similar. While you're talking, there's a couple more very similar clips, different meetings the same week. So while y'all talking, I'm going to look for some others.
Okay, so you know, Robert. So there they are.
We don't want two states. We want all of it. Is
We want all
also
of it.
it's based on the Quran.
Are we gonna let them? No! Are we gonna let them just think they can be safe in our city? No! They can be comfortable in our city? No! This is why we
And this is in New York City that they're talking from.
We're gonna give them hell. And as long as Palestine is colonized, we will not give Zionists or their enablers a day of peace. Because they take away our peace. When they kill our people. Steal our land. And burn our olive trees. So what we're gonna say to these Zionist settlers, settlers, go back home. Settlers, go back home. Palestine is not the home.
Settlers go back home. Palestine is not your home. I've had enough of that. Back to you guys.
Yeah. So what they're okay. So again, it goes back to my point. So the BDS, they're very loud targeting Israel and Jews who support Israel. Very loud, and they're very clear on that they want to make the life of supporters of Israel in New York City very uncomfortable. So here's my point. So the BDS makes it clear loudly about Israel, but at the same time, they consider Western countries illegitimate. So the same chants that they're using today against Israel and Jews who support Israel, Robert, what are the chants going to be tomorrow for your average American, your average Canadian, who they don't recognize the legitimacy of these countries?
It's going to be the same. It's you're absolutely right. The Israel is first, and the West will follow. I was saying actually that this is also based on the Quran. The Quran says, "Drive them out from where they drove you out." Now you know that's chapter 2, verse 191. Now you know that the Jews did not actually drive the Arabs out of the state of Israel. This is a historical myth. As a matter of fact, the Arab Higher Committee told the Arabs to leave. The Israelis wanted them to stay and become part of the new state. But the Arab Higher Committee told them to leave because the surrounding Muslim Arab states were going to declare war on the new state of Israel and destroy it, and then the Arabs would be able to come back home. It didn't work out that way. But it was the Arab League and the Muslim leaders in the area who made the Muslim Arabs leave the land of Israel. It was not the Israelis. But nonetheless, it has become a staple of Palestinian jihad propaganda that it was the Israelis who drove the Muslim Arabs out, the so-called Palestinians, and consequently, they have this divine responsibility, this responsibility before Allah, drive them out from where they drove you out. Now, it works in exactly the same way for Canada and the United States. That's why they say that these places are on stolen land. Really, when you look back in history, you can say everywhere is stolen land because migration and conquest are constants of human history. And I could say that my family was, it's perfectly true. My family was exiled from the Ottoman Empire. So can I go back and say Turkey is stolen land and I want my ancestral home back? Nobody ever says that, of course, because it was Muslims who were doing the driving out. And so they don't have the same kind of idea that they have this theological necessity to take it back. But Canada and the United States are going to be subjected to exactly the same thing. We're already seeing it. As a matter of fact, I did a piece at Jihad Watch the other day about a university in British Columbia, Meir. What was it called? I had not heard of it before, I admit. University of, it was UFV, Fraser Valley. Right. And it was saying that it was going to fight Islamophobia using critical race theory in an upcoming seminar. And I was writing about this and about academic fads and how silly it is to talk about race in the context of Islam, since Muslims are of all races and jihadis are of all races. But in any case, I noticed while working on the article that the University of Fraser Valley's website says, we acknowledge that we exist on land, unceded land of the Stolo people, something like that. That we're on stolen land. In other words, now they might think that they're being generous and kind and sweet in doing that, and multicultural and diverse and all these things that people want to be nowadays. But those kinds of admissions are going to come back to haunt them, because there is going to come a day when people say, well, if you're admitting you're on stolen land, then it's time for you to leave.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's I think one thing that we really have to get across to as many people as possible is that point, is exactly who they're targeting. That yes, they're loud about the Jews right now, but their target is everybody else. And until people wake up and realize that, just like with the Nazis during the Holocaust, that the Nazis were so front and center focused and loud about we're going to get the Jews, and everybody else is saying, well, why should I get involved? He's just talking about the Jews. Maybe some of them hate the Jews. Maybe some of them are just indifferent. But he meant everybody else, because millions of other people were murdered because of the Nazis. So today, this is what it is. And it's very important to get that point across. I just saw a graphic advertising the Dyke March in Chicago. And it was a caricature of a Dyke person holding two flags, burning an American flag in one hand and an Israeli flag in the other hand. And that's the message that they're getting across. Destroy Israel, destroy America. And until people take it seriously, more of that is going to go on, and it's going to grow, and it's going to sprout.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And not only that, there was another flyer that the same Chicago Dyke March put out that said, Queers for Palestine, Zionism is queer phobic. And I thought, okay, you try to go to Gaza and see how you're received versus how you'd be received in Tel Aviv. And these people just have, their balloon never lands. They're not in touch with reality at all.
Why is it that you can't have any kind of rational conversation with people from the left that are obsessed like that?
That's a good question. I think that the whole leftist enterprise is anti-rational. After all, socialism and communism there are no ideologies in the history of the world that have been so massively discredited. There are no ideologies in the history of the world that have body counts like socialism and communism do. Millions and millions of people sacrificed on the altars of these false beliefs and false orderings of society. And yet here we are rushing again headlong to institute it here. People ought to know better, but obviously they have already been propagandized and miseducated to the degree that they think that they don't need to consider the evidence. They don't need to consider any of the historical record at all. They only need to look at what they wish for society, but it doesn't have anything to do with reality. And we know, Meir, that's what insanity is a refusal to face reality, a refusal to accept reality, a refusal to live in reality. And so liberalism is really, leftism is fundamentally insane. Yeah, there's the seminar I was talking about.
I'll show you. I'll bring up the post you mentioned for the Dyke March also. But this is, unfortunately, it's going on the same time as our show, so we can't be part of that. So what a shame. So regarding the Dyke March poster, if you've not seen it, there it is.
Yeah.
American flag.
Yeah. So what if you take that woman that's depicted there with the ACAB and have her walk through Gaza in that getup? Right. How long would she last?
Yeah,
within minutes, she would be raped and killed.
Yeah.
And yet they don't care. Reality has no effect.
Yeah, it's really. They might even enjoy getting slaughtered by Hamas.
Well, at least they would know, as the blade was slicing through their necks, they would know, look how non-racist and non-Islamophobic I am. Look how accepting I am of diversity. And so they would die happy.
It's just. we should do this on Saturday Night Live. Or Bill Maher would be good at it. Sometimes he does a real good show with this kind of stuff.
Yes.
It's unbelievable. Here, we got a call. 1 second. Hello, sir.
It's Sam Fishman from Calgary.
Hey, Sam. How you doing? You're on the show.
I'm doing good.
Yes.
Enjoying the show, but
Do you have a question for Robert Spencer? Comment?
I'm doing good. The problem is, it's always talking to the choir.
Well, listen,
Right about
Sam.
that.
There's something to be said about talking to the choir, but I believe fundamentally, anyways, that one of the essential programs that we should be working on is reaching out to our supporters to invigorate them with the truth and make them stronger advocates to go out. And I see merit in working maybe with our closed circle and using that closed circle to reach out to the masses. So that's how it is. Listen, Sam, thank you very much for calling. That's how I feel. We have to strengthen each other and strengthen our base and be stronger and speak the truth and not be afraid to, and reach out to others through our networks. And I really believe that. I don't believe in talking to the wall. I believe in that's so important to.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, when we speak to the choir, I mean, it would be great to be able to go on the Canadian national television and have this discussion. But when we speak to the choir, people who might have questions have the questions answered, or they might learn arguments that they can use when they're talking to people. And so it's all to the good.
Hello, sir. You're on the air.
Hello.
Yes.
Yes, it's Brian Wallace from Tweed. I wanted to ask Robert Spencer.
Sure.
What is his assessment of the Abraham Accords?
Okay.
Is there an Arab bloc that is trying to break away from the Quran? Is that how we should think of it?
Well, they're trying to break away from being bound by the Quran as the primary guide to policy. But they can't just discard Islam. They would lose power immediately. They'd be overthrown from within. But yes, the Abraham Accords represent the triumph of pragmatism over ideological fanaticism. The countries that entered into the Abraham Accords, Bahrain, UAE, Sudan, they have reasons that they have very cogent reasons for allying with Israel that are above and beyond the Quranic hatred of Jews and the idea that they must drive out those who drove them out. The country of Bahrain, for example, is considered by the Islamic Republic of Iran to be the 15th province of Iran. And the UAE is also threatened by Iran. Saudi Arabia, which of course has not entered into a formal accord with Israel, but there are numerous reports of behind the scenes cooperation and collaboration. They have a large Shiite minority on the eastern coast of Saudi Arabia near Iran. And so all of these countries are threatened by Iran, just as Israel is threatened by Iran. They are working together on the basis of that. And that's all to the good, because together they're stronger than they would be separately. The whole conflict that recently broke out again between Hamas and Israel was in part motivated from the Hamas side by an attempt to stop this and to bring those countries back into line supporting the Palestinian Jihad. And they thought that if they started a violent conflict again with Israel, that Bahrain and the UAE would have to choose between the Palestinians and Israel and would choose the Palestinians. That could still end up being the way it is. But it could also happen that for the moment, pragmatism will win out, because another paradoxical effect of the disastrous Biden administration is that Biden's handlers, by appeasing Iran, are making it clearer to the countries in the region that are threatened by Iran that they need to work together. And so even though the Biden administration has turned against the Abraham Accords and wants them repudiated because they show up the foreign policy establishment, it was the amateurs, so-called, of the Trump era who concluded these agreements. And so the foreign policy establishment is back in power now and wants to destroy these agreements and show that they were right all along. Despite that, their own relentless appeasement of Iran may end up strengthening these accords. But it's not that they're discarding Islam. They're just walking away from it a little bit. There are many times that's happened throughout history, as I show in my book, The History of Jihad. And there are sometimes hundreds of years where there are accords worked out between Muslim and non-Muslim states on the basis of other considerations. And that could be what happens here. They could also be destroyed by a reassertion of the Islamic principles. We're going to have to, we'll see how it works out.
We have really a short clip regarding the Abraham Accords, what's going on in terms of another angle, that there's a pipeline that Israel has from Eilat to Ashkelon. And they actually made this pipeline to have a deal with Iran years ago before the Khomeini era, when the Shah ruled Iran, that they were going to use this pipeline for Iranian oil to go through Eilat to Ashkelon, to the Mediterranean. So now the UAE and Bahrain, they're talking about using this pipeline to get their oil, so they don't have any problems using the Suez Canal. Very recently, it was blocked even by some huge ship. So we do have a clip about this. Looks like a deal that's going to happen, and that would really revolutionize things as well.
Okay, I'm going to find that clip. It'll take a couple of minutes. It's about 3 minutes long. So as soon as it's on, you'll know it because it'll be on the screen.
Well, that's good. And
Thank you.
this
Thank
will
you for
have,
the answer.
well, thank you for calling.
Okay, bye.
And the Abraham Accords seems to be a major dagger in the heart of if they have a heart, of the BDS and the radical Islamic movement. There's no question about it. They don't want any normalization with Israel. And it seems that there's more and more Islamic countries or Arab countries that...
The pipeline actually has a very interesting history. It was built in 1968 as a part of an agreement between Israel and Iran. Tehran used to be represented by the moderate Shah regime those days, and Israel and Iran used to be allies. The two countries had then constructed the strategic pipeline to transport Iranian crude oil to customers in Israel and Europe. The Trans-Israel pipeline became a lifeline for the Iranian oil trade when Egypt closed the Suez Canal in 1967. But the 1979 Islamic Revolution toppled the Shah of Iran, and consequently, the Trans-Israel pipeline fell into disuse. Now, the Trans-Israel Pipeline project seems bound to resurrect as a great product of the Abraham Accord. Emirati and Israeli energy firms are pushing strongly to make this strategic asset a new symbol of cooperation and kickstart a new export route from the Gulf to Europe. The Trans-Israel Pipeline is in fact intimately tied to all the peace efforts in the region. In fact, soon after the UAE and Israel signed the Abraham Accord last year, a further deal was struck between owners of the said pipeline, the EAPC, and an Israeli UAE joint venture called the MED-RED Land Bridge. An EPAC statement in October 2020 revealed that under the said deal, the UAE will supply tens of millions of tons per year to the Trans-Israel pipeline. What the pipeline does is that it ensures that Israel has a central role to play in energy trade from the Gulf to Europe. And this is really a significant development given Israel's size as a country. The resurrection of the Trans-Israel pipeline ensures that the Jewish nation serves as a transportation link between Europe and the Gulf. Also, it was reported in December last year that former US President Donald Trump was pushing other Arab nations like Oman, Sudan, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan to partner with Israel in order to expand the Trans-Israel pipeline. Given the narrow passage of the Suez Canal route and the recent incident of a container ship blocking the canal in May, other Arab nations would, in fact, be tempted to get involved in the Trans-Israel pipeline. The other thing is that Israel is also working on the EastMed pipeline, which will connect Leviathan gas field in Israel and the Aphrodite gas field in Cyprus to Greece before entering the European markets. The project excludes a belligerent Turkey from cooperation in energy trade via the Eastern Mediterranean. The Trans-Israel pipeline will also ensure that the Jewish nation gets primacy in transporting Gulf oil while Turkey remains isolated. Once the oil transported by the UAE and possibly even other Gulf countries reaches Ashkelon in Israel, it can be easily shipped into Europe via the Mediterranean Sea, or a linkage can also be drawn with the EastMed pipeline after shipping the Arab oil to either Cyprus or Greece. In any case, the UAE and Israel will be able to manage complete autonomy over oil trade through the Gulf and the Eastern Mediterranean and into Europe, and the biggest losers here are Turkey and Iran.
Yeah, it's a good idea to show that video to the BDS. Continuous. Like
Yes.
a loop.
Can we also use that pipeline to transport hummus all over the world? I mean, there's like sidelight of it. Be helpful.
It's unbelievable. I mean, the era that we're living in, that's this is unbelievable. You know, you could imagine if that really does bear fruit like that, how that would revolutionize everything. And yeah, dramatic. And I like in that presentation that they said President Donald Trump was urging other Arab and Islamic countries to be very involved with this pipeline. With President Trump, there's peace in the Middle East. This administration, we don't see that.
Well, you know, Trump really understood what needed to be done to bring about peace in the Middle East in a way that no foreign policy so-called expert had been able to figure out before that. As a matter of fact, I'm sure, Meir, you've seen the famous clip of former Secretary of State John Kerry saying it is not possible, it just can't be done to make peace in the Middle East without first making peace between Israel and the Palestinians. Trump was the first one to dare to turn that conventional wisdom around and to bypass the Palestinians, understanding that their commitment to Islamic jihad made them intransigent and made it impossible to make peace. And so instead he appealed to these other Muslim Arab nations on pragmatic bases, and it worked.
Yep.
And now Kerry, of course, is back as part of the Biden administration, and the Biden administration has once again opened up the money flow to the Palestinians and made it clear that they're going to return to the old policies of appeasement of the Palestinians to try to bring about peace, even though this has never worked and has failed for decades.
Yeah. Yeah. No, 100%. It's just unbelievable. You know, it's a shame that he's forced out. Hopefully he'll be back. But it's unbelievable. He had the vision and the knowledge, what it takes.
And see, he enraged the establishment, but because they thought of him as an interloper, as an amateur. And so a lot of this is just ego, that these people have been in Washington for decades, people like Kerry.
Yep.
They have been getting high salaries and lots of perks, being presented as the people who are the experts in the Middle East, who know how this all works and know what needs to be done.
Mhm.
And he showed them up. He showed that they didn't know what they were doing and that their prescriptions were wrong. And he showed what really would work. And so now that they have indeed forced him out, they have to try to reassert and show the world again that they were right all along. And they, it seems as if the Biden administration is just rejecting the Abraham Accords just because Trump concluded them.
Yeah.
And they have to once again prove that Trump was all wrong and that they know how to really do it, but they don't, and we already knew they didn't. And so they're just going to make things much, much worse once again.
So they'd rather embrace people who support Hamas and Iran rather than what seems to be pragmatism in the Gulf states.
Well, you know, Meir, also the Biden administration is full of people who have been on record for years as being against Israel. And as a matter of fact, Robert Malley, who's very high placed in the Biden administration, he was dismissed under pressure by the Obama administration for his support for Hamas. But now that nobody seems to mind.
Right.
And he's not the only one, unfortunately. During this the most recent conflict, Biden's handlers sent Hadi Amr over to Israel to try to calm things down. And Hadi Amr was an open supporter of the Palestinian Intifada when he was at Georgetown University, and he's never shown any indication of having moderated his views since then. And now he's being sent over to make peace between Israel and the Palestinians. The only peace Hadi Amr envisions between Israel and the Palestinians is based on Israeli surrender.
Right, right.
And they're, and by no means the only two. There's so many others. Haters of Israel all up and down the Biden administration, and nary a single supporter of Israel to balance them out. And so it's not at all surprising that what's happening is happening now. Another reason, I mentioned that Hamas acted now to try to bring the Abraham Accords countries back into the camp of the opposing Israel. But also another reason why this recent violence broke out is because Biden's handlers are in power in Washington. And so Hamas thought, with very good reason, that they could do this now, attack Israel now, and they would be supported in Washington.
Right. So we have another issue that just came up the past few days. One of the first things that the new government, coalition governments in Israel attempted to do was to implement a deal to supply to the Palestinian Authority over 1 million Pfizer COVID-19 vaccines. A small portion of these vaccines expire at the end of June. The greater majority of them expire the end of July. The PA went on a propaganda campaign to try to demonize Israel and say that everything has already expired, it's damaged goods, look what the Jews, Israel are trying to do to us. And BDS groups in the United States and in Canada ran with this message and continuously through social media to say, let's blame Israel. They want to create harm to the Palestinians, they want to kill Palestinians, so on and so forth. It's nonstop in every direction.
Absolutely. Meir, you know, a couple things about that. One is that according to the Oslo Accords, which are technically still in effect, even though the Palestinians routinely ignore the provisions regarding peace with Israel, the Palestinian Authority has the responsibility for public health in its domains, including vaccinations. And so Israel had no obligation whatsoever to do anything for the Palestinians in regard to the coronavirus. That's
Mhm.
one thing. The other point is, as you noted, the vaccines, the earliest expiration date was the end of June. Now, as we are having this discussion tonight, it's June 23rd, which
Yeah.
would have given the Palestinians over a week to how many thousands of people can you vaccinate in a week before
Let
these
me weigh
things
in for a second
expire?
regarding the whole concept of expiration dates. From a medical perspective, if it expires at a date, that doesn't mean at midnight it's no good anymore. The estimation is that 80% of medications, with the exception of nitroglycerin and some other very volatile medications, don't expire till a year or two after the expiration date. Now, we know that because in medicine, the military once did a study because they were throwing away medications on the expiration date. Well, they found out that they were throwing away like $227 million worth of medications that were perfectly good. So again, remember that just because it says expiration date, it's just like if something says, don't eat after this date or don't sell after this date. It's still good after that date. So when you guys want, I'm going to show a little video from this whole vaccination debacle. You all keep talking, and as soon as you want me to show the video, I'll show it. But meanwhile, you all keep chatting.
Great. Yeah, it's nonstop. And again, like I said, they say all this, it's all demonizing Israel, but at the same time, these groups, they hate America, they hate Canada, they hate the West, and pretty soon the lingo is going to switch. Just going to move the word Israel and Jews over to Americans and the West.
It's already starting,
Yeah.
Death to America has been the slogan of the Islamic Republic of Iran for decades. And we heard that American demonstrators chanting it last summer in the riots all around the country.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to weigh in with a quick video. It's 4 or 5 minutes long, and then afterwards you'll get back on. Here comes the video.
Moving on, the Palestinian Authority now rejecting the delivery of over 1 million coronavirus vaccines from Israel. And this after just receiving the first shipment of roughly 100,000 doses.
Palestinian Authority even now demanding an investigation into what they're calling the vaccine scandal.
But Israel is insisting that the doses are perfectly sound, identical to those given to Israelis, and that anyways, the Palestinian Authority knew full well about the pending expiration dates. According to the agreement reached with Pfizer's involvement, Israel would provide over 1 million vaccines to the Palestinian Authority and in return receive the PA's shipment of Pfizer vaccines, which are scheduled to arrive in September. This way, Palestinians could get vaccinated sooner, and Israel could restore its stocks at a later date.
Now, this has absolutely nothing to do with expiration dates. On our staff, one of our editors, Kiva Van Koningswald, working with our managing editor, Charles Biebelser, revealed that just last Friday, the Palestinian Ministry of Health announced that it has the capacity to vaccinate at the pace of 80,000 shots per day. That means that the full 1.4 million doses that Israel is offering could be administered in 17 and a half days. Khaled Abu Tomeh, a Palestinian-Israeli journalist, wrote this morning in the Jerusalem Post that when the Palestinian government announced this deal, you'd think Palestinian people would be happy, but the Palestinian street exploded with objection. They said it was a scandal, they said it was normalizing the occupation, which is a phrase that refers to recognizing Israel's existence at all, and they demanded that the Palestinian Authority back off of this deal, which is exactly what the Palestinian Authority
Could the Palestinian Authority have not explained that receiving vaccines from Israel doesn't normalize anything, really? Or does it?
Well, it does because it shows that the Palestinian government is interacting with what they refer to as the Zionist entity.
Well, they do that anyway with security control and certain administrative governance.
They try to do it in a way that isn't terribly public. They try to hide that as much as possible so that people don't realize that it's happening.
So I'm going to give a little editorialization here from a medical perspective of the whole concept of not only the vaccine, but other BDS things that they should really be careful of if they're not going to be using the vaccine. So first we're accused of not vaccinating, and now we're accused of them not wanting to accept our vaccine because they say it's expired. Well, the chairman of Pfizer, by the way, is the child of Holocaust survivors. He's a Sephardic Jew born and raised in Greece. And his parents were among the very few Jews who actually survived the Holocaust from their little town. His mother was moments away from being shot dead until a Nazi was bribed by her non-Jewish brother-in-law. And since the Palestinian Authority has decided that our medical products don't meet their standards, here's a short list of other things they shouldn't really take, including polio vaccine, hepatitis vaccine, measles vaccine, penicillin, tuberculosis, and other things which are Jewish inventions, contributions, and scientific breakthroughs. So I think that if they're not going to take the vaccine, they shouldn't take any of this stuff either, or use a Heimlich maneuver if they're choking on ice cream. But of course, if they're choking on ice cream, they shouldn't be eating the ice cream anyway, because most of the ice creams that we're eating internationally are actually from Jews. Haagen-Dazs by the Rose and Reuben Mattis, the Baskin Robbins, Ben and Jerry's. So they don't need the Heimlich maneuver because they shouldn't be eating the ice cream in the first place, because then they won't fit into their jeans made by Levi Strauss, Ralph Lauren, Calvin Klein, Donna Karan, or Jordache. And then if they do eat too much ice cream, they can't fit into their jeans. They better seek where they can possibly get on some sort of a diet program, since Jenny Craig, Slim Fast, Weight Watchers, and Atkins were all started by Jews as well. So back to BDS, you better just watch what you're doing, because there's not much you can do, and be careful which diets you choose, because you just might diet at a young age. That's all the medical advice I've got for you today. Back to you guys in the studio, and I'm signing out.
It's incredible. It's incredible. We have a lot of work to do ahead of us. There's no question about it. I think, people are starting to wake up in certain segments. We have to continuously present the facts as much as we can. And I know one thing about Israel. From where it started, with next to nothing, to where it is today, it's a success story. And you look at society in Gaza and Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, what they are doing with it. They're not productive. They're not interested in being productive. And the future for Israel is very bright. There used to be a demographic ticking time bomb over the heads of Israelis, that the Arab birth rate was so high and the Jewish birth rate was so low. That has completely reversed. And the Jewish birth rate, in particular the religious, is very strong. And that's a key point also as we move forward with the focus of we see what the BDS is doing, because like I said, the Arab birth rate is going down, and largely because women are going into the workforce and education, and that they're not just at home having 9, 10, 11, 12 kids or more in some families. Now it's not anything like that. And Jewish birth rate has gone up, and the workforce is strong in Israel. And in particular, when it comes to the Orthodox Jews, the religious Jews in Israel, having a high birth rate, the more identity there is, Judaism there is, and commitment to Jewish tradition and our religion and our way of life, and the stronger that segment of the population is, the more Israel is guaranteed to be a Jewish state. And that's going to be part of the campaign, the target of the BDS, as they see this reality happening, that they'll be more blatant in their anti-Semitism. We have to stop the religious Jews from having kids. That will be their mantra as we go forward. But as we go forward, Israel's a success story, and it's only getting better. And as we saw with the potential of the Abraham Accords, with the deals and the pipelines, that will just revolutionize everything for Israel and those countries that want to be part of it. Let's see. I'll show the Palestinians. Yeah, why not? We have another video. There was a torch march. This was not Charlottesville. This
Nor-
was in Jerusalem.
It looks more like Beauty and the Beast. I think that they should be caught for plagiarism, but I'll show you. Well, let's get the audience opinion. If anybody wants to chat and type in what you think, but here's a little video. Be with you in a minute with that video. And now, it's hard to believe this is modern day. You would think this is back in the days of the conquest of taking land over. These are Palestinian teenagers at night in Jerusalem. This isn't in some Arab faraway, Islamo-fascist theocracy. This is in Jerusalem.
And again, it's not Charlottesville.
Right. Nor is it. This is again, the plagiarism is pretty obvious. Of course, here's another short video, very similar.
Running wild, there's no question, but I fear the wrong monsters released.
Well, there you have
What was that?
That was Beauty and the Beast, the scene.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
It reminded me of those Palestinians with the torches at night going after the beast. And first, like we know, the beast turns out to be the good guy, just like the beast they're going after, just like when Goliath went after David.
Absolutely. And we're working on a logo, David and Goliath, and that's what it is. But we're going to be successful. There's no question about it. I have no doubt about that. And the truth rules, and that's it. And everyone who speaks the truth is going to have the blessings, because there's just no doubt about it. 100%. We're against the hate that's out there. And it's ugly, and it's vicious, and it's serious, and we take that threat very seriously. And those people with the torches, anyone calling them out? No. And they're actually saying similar to what those neo-Nazis said in Charlottesville. Jews will not replace us. They say, we will not allow the Jews to Judaize Jerusalem. That's what they say. And everyone is silent and quiet about them. They believe that might is right and might rules. No, truth rules, and they have no foundation to stand on. We're going to keep saying it. We're going to keep repeating it. We're not backing down. You've been at it for how many years, Robert?
About 300. I've been at it. Well, my first book came out 20 years ago. So, but I was doing this before that as well. It's been a long time.
Right. Well, listen, it's wonderful having you on the air, and we'll keep.
Always good to talk to you.
We'll keep speaking the truth, and we have to. And
absolutely.
It's been great having you on. Any final comments you could leave everybody with?
Well, I think that what you said there was very important, that the truth is going to prevail. Sometimes the truth is covered over for long periods of time. You know, the Soviet Union lasted for 70 years. The Nazis lasted for 12. But they always fall. And the harder we push and the more we persist, the quicker they will fall. This new totalitarian impulse on the left that involves hatred of Israel is doomed to failure because it's built on lies. And so we have to just persevere and keep on pointing out the lies and keep on telling the truth. And the more that we do, the less likely they will be to succeed for any significant period.
Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. Robert, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure.
I mean, for sure. Give my best to Pamela, too. We're going to be signing off. It's always a blessing to have the show, be able to speak to the people out there in Cyberland. It's nice when people phone in, give us your thoughts, your opinions, questions, That's excellent. And again, every single week we bring you more information of what's going on. One of the things we're doing, one of the activities that we're doing with our new group, we're going to be having regular meetings. We're going to be monitoring, high-level monitoring of anti-Semitic, BDS, anti-West organizations through social media. We'll be using our base of lawyers also to take action. We have a lot of work ahead of us. Anti-Semitism, like we said, is on the rise, and we're certainly not going to take a back seat to that. Does our doctor in the studio have anything to say?
Well, I've got a couple of songs to play. I just want to know that perhaps one of these weeks we could do a special episode called Lifestyles in the Rich and Famous from the terrible Palestinian territories. Here we have a couple little cottages, and this is not artificial. You can go to Google Earth and look at these. Gaza has 200 millionaires and 2 billionaires living in Gaza, yet they couldn't afford to vaccinate their own people. And, you know, in the Palestinian territories in the West Bank, they wouldn't accept our vaccinations. Meanwhile, they first started off by condemning us for not providing them. Then we provide them, they won't take them. And they, again, based on their cottages and the homes, they probably could afford to buy their own vaccines anyway.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. Well, we have a song?
Of course. We'll end this one with 2 versions of Hatikva.
Oh, beautiful.
One is here.
טייסי חיל האוויר הישראלי, בשמי מחנה הזוועות, קמנו מעבר מיליוני הקורבנות, נושאים את זעקתם הנעלמת, מצדיעים לגבורתם ומבטיחים להיות מגן לעם היהודי ולארצו ישראל.
Well, any closing words before our closing song?
Mm-hmm.
Our final credits? It's all you, okay? And let's find our closing credits. Of course, I like to close with just a quick advertisement. The concealed carry talit bag. Don't leave home without it.
Shalom